What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 17, Monday Night Football. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. Okay guys, in this video, I'm going to give you my top DFS picks for this Monday Night Football showdown between the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, NFL Week 17. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So at the quarterback position, I like Joe Burrow from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Buffalo Bills, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing quarterbacks. Joe Burrow has averaged 24.5 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 4.8 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 62% owned, projected at 20.7 fantasy points here tonight. He's 10,800 DraftKings salary, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Bengals trailing by 1.5. So Joe Burrow has scored 29, 26, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He got 4, 3, and 6 rush attempts in those games. So I like Joe Burrow here versus the Buffalo Bills. So I also like Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills. The Bengals have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing quarterbacks. Josh Allen has averaged 27.3 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 7.7 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 67% owned, projected at 23.9 fantasy points here tonight. He's 11,400 DraftKings salary, so only 600 more than Joe Burrow. That's why I think you could play either one of these quarterbacks. And Josh Allen has scored 25, 40, and 21 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He got 6, 10, and 10 rush attempts in those games. So I like Josh Allen here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So the stud on the slate is Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals. The Buffalo Bills have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing running backs. Both of these defenses are good here tonight, and Joe Mixon has averaged 17.3 fantasy points per game on the season, gets an average of 15.3 rush attempts per game, and 5.4 pass targets per game. He's projected at 14.9 fantasy points here tonight. He's on the field for 65% of the snaps, going to be about 41% owned. He's 9,000 DraftKings salary, and Joe Mixon has scored he scored 18, 10, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 16, 11, and 14 rush attempts on top of 9, 6, and 2 pass targets. So pretty good volume last game. Not so much the previous games before that. But if he can get 20 plus touches here tonight, he should be in a pretty good spot. So I like Joe Mixon here versus the Buffalo Bills. The other running back you could consider if you want to save some salary is Devin Singletary from the Buffalo Bills playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing running backs as well. So Devin Singletary, he he's averaged 12.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.3 rush attempts per game and 3.4 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 67% of the snaps. He's going to be about 21% owned, projected at 11 fantasy points here tonight. He's 7,000 DraftKings salary, and Devin Singletary has scored 24, 10, and 5 fantasy points in the last 3 games, up of 12, 13, and 8 rush attempts, on top of 3, 4, and 2 pass targets. So I like Devin Singletary here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, for the Buffalo Bills, it looks like their running backs are sharing the load here. So the other running back you could consider for the Bills is James Cook. And he's averaging 6.6 fantasy points per game on the season. But he's gotten some increased volume in the past couple of games. Had a pretty good game last week. So James Cook is going to be about 22% owned. And he's projected at 8.1 fantasy points here tonight. He's 5,600 DraftKings salary, and he scored 18, 12, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 11, 5, and 4 rush attempts, on top of 2, 3, and 1 pass targets. So I do expect James Cook to possibly out-touch Devin Singletary here tonight. It looks like their touch count was tied last game. Actually, no, Devin Singletary had 15 touches. James Cook had 13 touches. So they're either going to share the touch count here tonight, or I think James Cook will get a few extra looks. So I like James Cook here versus the Cincinnati Bengals.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Now, if you're worried about the Bengals possibly resting Joe Mixon a little bit here, and you want to save some salary on this slate at the running back position and go with a guy who has much less ownership, take a look at the backup running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, Samaje Perine. And Samaje Perine has averaged 9.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 rush attempts per game, 3.3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 14% owned. He's 4,600 DraftKings salary. He scored 5, 3, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 4, 7, and 4 rush attempts, on top of 4, 1, and 5 pass targets. So he got 8 to 9 touches in each of the last 3 games. So I'm expecting another 10 to 15 touches here tonight. And that could make him a pretty decent value play, especially if he could find the end zone. So I like Samaje Perine as a value play here versus the Buffalo Bills. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So we got a couple of studs on the slate. Actually, we have 3 studs on the slate. Let's start out with the stud with the best matchup. That is Jamar Chase from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Buffalo Bills, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Jamar Chase has averaged 21.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11 pass targets per game and 0.5 rush attempts per game. He's been on the field for 96% of the snaps, going to be about 53% owned, projected at 19 fantasy points here tonight, He's 10,600 DraftKings salary. And Jamar Chase has scored 15, 19, and 32 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 11, 13, and 15 pass targets. So good matchup here. Probably has the highest ceiling on the slate. Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs, they would have the highest ceiling on the slate. So I like Jamar Chase here versus the Buffalo Bills. Now the other wide receiver from the Bengals that can put up some pretty big numbers is T. Higgins. And he's averaging 15.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.8 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 38% owned, projected at 16.1 fantasy points here tonight. He's 9,800 DraftKings salary, which feels a little bit overpriced considering you can get Jamar Chase for 800 more. But this is a showdown slate, so if T. Higgins is the guy to get the touchdowns, he's probably going to outperform Jamar Chase at a lower price tag. Obviously, if that's the case, he'll be a better play. So T. Higgins has scored 30 and 16 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 9 and 8 pass targets. So I like T. Higgins here versus the Buffalo Bills. So the stud on the slate for the Buffalo Bills is Stephon Diggs, and he's averaging 20.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 52% owned, projected at 18 fantasy points here tonight. He's 10,400 DraftKings salary. Stephon Diggs, he's cooled off quite a bit the last 3 games. Scored 5, 11, and 7 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 2, 9, and 5 pass targets. So not encouraging when you look at his game log, but this guy has easy 20 plus fantasy point upside. So I like Stephon Diggs here versus the Cincinnati Bengals.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, now coming down in salary here, once you get off of those studs, there's a pretty big salary drop to the next eligible wide receiver, and that is Gabe Davis from the Buffalo Bills. Oh, and the Cincinnati Bengals, although they have a good defense overall, they're middle of the pack defending opposing wide receivers. Gabe Davis has averaged 12.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 92% of the snaps, gonna be about 33% owned, projected at 11.7 fantasy points here tonight. He's 6,400 DraftKings salary, and Gabe Davis has scored 13, 10, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 6, and 4 pass targets. So I like this play quite a bit. I'm a big fan of these mid-range wide receivers for both teams. So I like Gabe Davis here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Now for the Cincinnati Bengals, the mid-range value play is Tyler Boyd. He's averaging 10.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 23% owned, projected at 9.4 fantasy points here tonight. He's only 5,000 DraftKings salary, And he's got a good matchup here as the Buffalo Bills give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Tyler Boyd has scored 5 and 15 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 4 and 5 pass targets. And I'm leaning towards Tyler Boyd being my favorite value play on the slate. I think he's got some pretty big upside here for only $5,000 DraftKings salary. He's certainly capable of scoring 2 touchdowns, so I like Tyler Boyd here versus the Buffalo Bills. Okay, now if you're looking for a value play on the slate, a low salary play that's got some opportunity here, take a look at Isaiah McKenzie from the Buffalo Bills. He's averaging 8.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.4 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 25% owned, projected at 8.2 fantasy points here tonight. He's $2,800 DraftKings salary. Now, Isaiah McKenzie, he scored 1, 4, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 2, 5, and 5 pass targets. So I like Isaiah McKenzie as a low salary option here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. And I guess the last wide receiver you should take a look at here tonight is Trenton Irwin from the Cincinnati Bengals. So Trenton Irwin has averaged 7.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 2.6 pass targets per game. So doesn't get a lot of volume, but he's played pretty well the past 3 games. On the field for 94% of the snaps, only going to be about 3% owned. So this is looking like a deep sleeper pick here. He's $4,400 DraftKings salary, and Trenton Irwin has scored 20, 2, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 4, 2, and 2 pass targets. So you can argue that Trenton Irwin is a decent value play here, although I wish he was a little bit lower in salary because he's only $600 less than Tyler Boyd, and I think that's why his ownership is going to be so low. Because for $4,400, I'd rather play Tyler Boyd for $5,000. And if you're going with a value play on a guy that's going to get 2 to 5 pass targets, probably looking at Isaiah McKenzie at $2,800. But just depending on how your lineup shapes out, you might have $4,500 or so left over for your final position. And in that case, I like Trenton Irwin here versus the Buffalo Bills. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. Both of these tight ends are reasonably priced, so I think both of these guys are pretty good plays. So for the Buffalo Bills, you have Dawson Knox. The Cincinnati Bengals are pretty good versus opposing tight ends, but Dawson Knox has averaged 9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 81% of the snaps, going to be about 23% owned, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight. He's $4,800 DraftKings salary. And Dawson Knox, he scored 13, 22, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 5, 8, and 7 pass targets. So he's looking like a pretty decent play here, sitting at $4,800 DraftKings salary. So I like Dawson Knox here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, now making his return to the field tonight is Hayden Hurst from the Cincinnati Bengals. The Buffalo Bills are good versus opposing tight ends. Hayden Hurst has averaged 8.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 28% owned, projected at 7.4 fantasy points here tonight. And I like this play because he's only $3,000 DraftKings salary. So I like Hayden Hurst here versus the Buffalo Bills.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite
Player for this NFL slate.
I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.